Hi, it's Alex Cosper. Welcome to another studio chat for SacTV.com. And today I want to talk about oil prices, the history of oil, why oil matters, and how it's like the key industry that affects every other industry on this planet almost. If it involves any kind of transportation or delivery of physical materials or energy. I mean, it's just kind of this all-encompassing issue that affects all of us. Although it's possible for any of us to boycott oil as much as we can if it becomes too expensive. So, I mean, that's the main issue I want to talk about. How expensive is oil going to get? Partly because of the war with Iran that is started by Trump. He's the one who bombed them first without them ever attacking us. And he... is working with Israel to try to wipe out Iran. It looks like it's unclear what Trump does or means, or he's such an entertainer that he mixes that with so much theater to what he does in politics. Trump claimed that the reason for the strikes was to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons, even though back in March the head of intelligence Tulsi Gabbard said that Iran was not working on nuclear weapons and had no program and didn't intend to make nuclear weapons. They simply have nuclear facilities for energy usage. And Trump said that was all a lie leading into this weekend, just bombing. And then Tulsi Gabbard went along with Trump and said something like she didn't want to be unclear. She wanted to make sure people understood that Iran can develop nuclear weapons if they want. But anyway, it's just a bunch of storytelling. And so it's hard to say what's real with Trump and what's just theater. Keep in mind, he was a born rich business failure. A lot of people think he was a business success, but he never really was. He basically ran casinos into the ground. He filed bankruptcy 4 times, and most of those times was using other people's money. So he himself was born with a huge inheritance from his father, Fred Trump. So that's where maybe a quarter of his wealth was derived from his inheritance. And then after that, it came from TV contracts with CBS, NBC, Worldwide Wrestling Entertainment, with Fox News. I mean, so he's intertwined. Mainly, he's a media figure. He was born rich, so that put him in the media because they started doing stories on him. NBC started doing stories on him to build him up as this character that they began to promote as a possible future presidential candidate. That starting on the Today Show in 1980 with Tom Brokaw, and then after that, big name people like Oprah Winfrey tried to get him to talk about becoming president someday on her TV show, and then Letterman, Leno, and all those other guys, late night guys, they had Trump on their shows a lot. So Trump just became this TV character. He's not a business success. He's a TV character, and he was a game show host for a while in which he acted as though he were a business success in the show Apprentice. So anyway, that was his history. He knew nothing about deal making. He didn't write that book called The Art of the Deal. That was ghost written for him. So he had so much money he could pay for all of this kind of stuff. So he's not like a regular person. He's someone who pays for whatever he wants. He pays for crowds. He's done that in the past. Then again, so did Hillary Clinton. But anyway, he's this warmonger. That's what he really turns out to be, even though he campaigned as a kind of a peacenik hippie with weird hair. He himself is a warmonger, just a regular establishment warmonger. And there's nothing different from what he's doing than what LBJ was doing in the 60s. So, for a long time, every president we've had has been kind of a warmonger, even if they campaign as a peacenik, and then that's not what they turn out to be. It's just part of the broken system, you see. And it's got lies built in. There's things that we learned from the media company Hearst. William Randolph Hearst was one of the originators of yellow journalism, which is mixing baloney with an ounce of truth and then using it to create media stories to scare people. And sometimes you could scare people into supporting war. That's what they did with the Spanish-American War of 1898. That was kind of the beginning of this yellow journalism, in which you can create false flags, fool people into thinking someone's the enemy, and they're going to get worse, and they're going to create a bigger problem. So you just make up that story, and then you go after the enemy, and then the people applaud because they think you're telling the truth. Well, that's just been baked in because of the oil industry. Okay, so anyway, oil prices, you might see them spike up like they started to do in June 2025 after Trump started talking bully with Iran. He said he was going to bomb Iran, their nuclear facilities, and he did. Then he bragged about it. Then he acted like that was it, the war is over. But yet Iran responded by saying that was an act of aggression by the Americans, and that it was illegal, and that they would not accept it. So Trump's trying to pretend that he won some quick 12-day war, that he collaborated with Israel's leader Benjamin Netanyahu, when it was really those guys who are dreaming up all kinds of terror and bombing places that are not hurting the United States. So anyway, whenever you see war happen, or any kind of excessive military action, a lot of times that drives up the price of oil. And then oil, it's refined into petroleum gasoline, and that's what people use to fuel their cars mostly. Those prices go up, gas prices go up. So we did see a spike as soon as Trump launched his attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. And he did it on a weekend so that it wouldn't impact the stock market, which is closed over the weekend except for the futures market, which has commodities and crypto and that kind of stuff. He did that so that, according to investigative journalist Seymour Hersh, who predicted this before big dumb media said anything about it, that Trump was going to attack Iran over the weekend. He said that like late in the week. And it happened. So Hersh was right again. He's not always right on everything, but he's one of the leading investigative journalists who's been right all along, dating back to Watergate. And so now we are stuck in this situation where it's not clear. And today the stock market did not react. This is Monday, June 23rd, 2025. and the stock market did not react as if there was any problem. In fact, it was up and oil was down. See, if oil gets up too high right now, it's like in the $70 range per barrel. If it gets over $100 a barrel, that's when it really impacts all these different industries, especially shipping, and it leads to higher prices at the supermarket. So that hasn't happened yet as of late June 2025, but there's always that concern that this escalation of military action is going to pump up oil prices. And the main concern for, I guess, people who use cars, I actually don't. I boycott them now. Eventually I'll get an electric car, or if I need a car, I rent one so that I'm not using it every single day. But anyway, most of my work is at home. It's online. I've been writing now since 2007 and getting paid for those articles for different websites and publications. And also the stock market. So I watch the market every day, and I learn a lot about it. I can't say I've gotten rich off of it so far. I'm right most of the time in my predictions and plays that I do in the stock market, but it's not with a lot of money, so it's not able to compound into this huge fortune like for some day traders. So I plus my trades are smaller and minimal, and I use a lot of risk management. Like, I don't do wild trades anymore. I used to, and they used to drain my account. But now one of the main things to watch when I'm looking at the entire market is oil prices. So because Trump is starting all this trash with the world, like with tariffs, he didn't have to do that. That can drive up prices. And he's trying to start this war with Iran, it looks like, but you never know what's going to happen. Anyway, it impacts oil prices, so then oil impacts everything else. Now, how did it come to be like this? Well, if you turn the pages back in history, and I always think it's important to learn about history, at least in the past couple hundred years, at least during the Industrial Revolution and history of Wall Street. You look at those two components mixed with the history of U.S. government, you have quite a lot of knowledge there that explains why the world is the way it is today. So I just want to go real fast into the timeline because I love studying timelines. That's how you can actually expand your thinking the quickest, I think, is by writing out a timeline of how things happen in the sequence they happened, and then you see how it all came together rather than it being just this big blur. So the oil industry, really, as we know it today, didn't start till 1859. Prior to that, 1850 is when they discovered kerosene from coal. It was more efficient than what was previously used as oil, which was whale blubber. And from 1700 to 1850, whale blubber and whaling, those were huge. That was a huge industry. And so, like a lot of people who rode on big ships, they were involved in the whale blubber trade. And whales were used for other products as well, like chess pieces, like their teeth and bones and stuff. They used that for chess pieces and piano keys. But whale blubber could also be turned into soap and other cleansers and varnish and paint. But it was also used, if you heat up whale blubber, it turns to oil. And that oil could be burned to light up a house at night. So, if you go too far back in history. You're talking about torches, you know. But then by the early, well, then it became candles. Candlelight was pretty popular, and candle could be made from whale blubber as well. It was 1859 though when um, the oil prospectors finally saw that there was black crude oil in the ground, which was easier to extract from the earth than whale hunting. So in a way, that's what saved the whales, was the oil industry of 1859 on. It wasn't long after that, within the next decade, a guy named John D. Rockefeller was like one of the first pioneers of the oil industry, besides the guy who discovered it before him. But he basically he saw that this was discovered in Pennsylvania, and Rockefeller was in Ohio, and so he started his own oil company, and it became known as Standard Oil Company. And by the 1880s, he partnered with all these different other oil type companies and merged it all together into this huge company, to where they had a monopoly on the oil industry in the 1880s. And so, but the oil industry wasn't used yet for every product imaginable. I mean, eventually, in the 20th century, we've used it for plastics, rubber, waxes, just all kinds of like medicine and food, petrochemicals used in food for like food coloring and flavors, artificial flavors. So, it took about 20 years for it to become this massive industry that started merging with all these other industries. By 1910, it merged with the medical industry. And the way they did that was Rockefeller donated lots of books to schools and funded schools, as long as they used his petrochemicals in the books that they were teaching about, where they only preached petrochemical medicine. In other words, oil-based medicine as opposed to natural medicine. So they threw out all the natural medicine books around 1910, starting in 1910. And then after that, the medical industry just went with oil-based medicine. That became just the standard foundation. And then by the 1920s, you had chemical companies merging with, working with oil companies, to where, like all these different chemicals were on the market that were derived from petroleum, petrochemicals. And then, Britain, before World War I, had influence in the Middle East, and their company, British Petroleum, they kind of took control of the oil in Persia, and they also controlled oil in other parts of the Middle East, and the Suez Canal, which opened in 1869 in Egypt. That's where they just made deals to control that Suez Canal there. And so the British had a lot of control of oil overseas, while Rockefeller had lots of control over oil here in the United States. And so as the decades went on, then we found out more of the Middle East had oil, especially Saudi Arabia, like by the late 1930s, to where, you had Standard Oil of California making deals with them and using their oil. And keep in mind that in 1911 is when the U.S. Justice Department decided that the Standard Oil was a monopoly, so that they broke it up into like over 30 companies that later became stuff that everyone's heard of, like ExxonMobil and Chevron and Unocal and just all that other stuff, Phillips 66. But it made Rockefeller richer because he owned shares in each of those companies, and then it just turned into an even bigger empire for him. So anyway, oil just became the dominant industry in the United States, taking us up to 1973 with the Arab oil embargo of 1973. That the Middle East had so much control over oil at that point that they had formed an organization called OPEC, which was basically a cartel that controlled Middle East oil and prices. And they decided to cut production and skyrocket. That's has to do with supply and demand. When you cut supply, it can turn up prices, and that's what they did once there was this outbreak of war between Israel versus Egypt and Syria. And the United States, under Nixon, backed Israel with weapons in 1973, and that's why the Arabs decided to cut supplies to the U.S., and that forced prices to skyrocket, like quadruple at the gas pump. So during the rest of the decade, the United States suffered from an energy crisis, and it had off and on, up and down, sporadic, volatile spikes in oil. And during that time, toward the end of the decade, President Carter was looking at alternative forms of energy, including solar. He installed solar panels on the White House, but he lost because the Iranian hostage situation in 1979 cost him the election. He was unable to resolve it because the next guys who came in, Reagan and Bush, had made a deal with Iran's government to hold the hostages until after the election. And that's when they released the hostages, right on the day that Reagan was sworn in as president. So anyway, Iran has a long history with oil and affecting U.S. oil prices. After that, in the 80s, the U.S. looked like they staged a war between Iran and Iraq to get back at Iran. And U.S. backed Iraq and even loaded them up on chemical weapons. And that led us into eventually the Gulf War, in which Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq, invaded Kuwait, who apparently was stealing oil from Iraq through slant drilling technology. But that never came out in the news. In fact, a lot of what happens in war and the oil industry just doesn't come out in the news. Like it wasn't that well known that the oil industry found out from their studies in the 50s and 60s that oil burning contributes to climate change and that it wrecks the environment. Okay, they knew that back in the 50s and 60s, and instead of telling the public that, they launched a campaign that there's no such thing as climate change. They ran that through the media because they were so rich. The oil industry was so rich, one of the top industries, that it could afford to pay for all that PR and advertising in the media that it was already linked to because it was one of the top sponsors in media. In fact, some of the earliest TV shows in the 1950s, the name of the oil company was part of the name of the TV show. But by the 60s, they dropped names of sponsors on TV shows because that didn't seem cool anymore. But anyway, that gives you some background on the history of oil and how it became so detrimental in our culture and economy, and that war does impact oil prices, so you might see higher prices at the pump if there's an escalation of war in the Middle East. Now I'd like to transition to my music, which is about this same topic. My latest song is called Way Down, which is about the oil industry. And it just summarizes it in kind of a poetic way on how oil became so influential in the American economy and in our culture.
Session.